Sarah Lancaster, a retired teacher in her late 60s, had grown accustomed to the silence that filled her home. The neighborhood, once alive with children's laughter and friendly gatherings, had slowly faded into an unrecognizable quiet over the years. She spent most days in her modest garden, trimming her plants with hands that had started to show the marks of time. Her favorite part of the day was the early morning, when she could breathe in the fresh air and feel the sun warming her skin. But on this particular morning, her routine was broken. As Sarah carefully pruned a row of daisies, she noticed two small figures approaching. At first, she squinted, unsure if her mind was playing tricks on her. But as they drew closer, she realized they were two little girls, no older than 7, with tight curly hair that bounced with every step. They seemed hesitant, almost frightened, their wide eyes darting around as if they feared something unseen. Her heart quickened at the sight, a strange feeling settling over her. When they finally reached her porch, Sarah noticed the worry etched deeply into their young faces. "Excuse me, miss," one of them said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can we talk to you?" The simplicity of the question, paired with the fear in their eyes, unsettled Sarah. In that instant, she knew that this wasn't just a simple visit from a neighbor's children. The girls carried an unspoken burden, one that no child should have to bear. And as she crouched down to meet their gaze, her heart seemed to stop. What followed shattered Sarah's peaceful world. The girls began to speak of nights filled with terror, of someone who called himself their new dad and made them do things that scared them. The depth of their words, spoken in trembling voices, was far beyond their years. Sarah's mind raced, her heart pounding, as she absorbed each detail, each hint of the horror these children had endured. In her years as a teacher, she had encountered many difficult situations, but nothing like this. This was something deeper, something that could not be ignored. Without hesitation, Sarah made a decision. She would be their ally, the one who listened and acted. She pulled them gently inside, offered them water, and reassured them with soft words. And as they sat in her warm living room, clutching their small cups with trembling hands, Sarah felt a surge of determination. This was her chance to do something meaningful, to protect these young souls from a life they should never have known. By the time they left her home that day, Sarah had a plan. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. For these two little girls, she would confront the darkness that had invaded their young lives. She would be the shield they needed, the person they could turn to in their time of need. The morning after her encounter with the twins, Sarah couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had settled in her heart. The house next door, with its drawn curtains and silent halls, had once been just another quiet, unremarkable place on the block. But now, with the knowledge of the fear lurking within its walls, Sarah's perspective had changed entirely. As she sipped her morning tea by the window, she kept a close eye on the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of the family, anything that would ease her concerns. Around midday, her patience was rewarded. She saw the door open, and out stepped a man she hadn't noticed the day before. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried himself with a tension that seemed to radiate from him, even from a distance. His face was stern, almost severe, and his movements were quick, impatient. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she watched him disappear into his car and drive away without a second glance at the house. She felt a chill run down her spine. This was no ordinary father figure. Something about him seemed off, his demeanor too harsh, too controlled. That evening, Sarah decided to formally introduce herself, hoping to meet the mother and perhaps get a sense of the family's dynamics. She baked a fresh loaf of bread, wrapped it warmly in a cloth, and made her way over. At the door, she knocked gently, waiting patiently for someone to answer. After a few moments, the door creaked open just a crack, and Sarah found herself face to face with the woman she assumed was the twins' mother. The woman, whom Sarah later learned was named Emily, looked worn and hesitant, her eyes darting as if expecting someone to appear behind her at any moment. Her gaze shifted to the bread in Sarah's hands, a flicker of warmth breaking through her guarded expression. "Hi, I'm Sarah from next door," she said gently, holding out the loaf as a peace offering. Emily forced a thin smile, taking the bread with trembling hands. "Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, and Sarah could sense the tension emanating from her. It was as if Emily was terrified of being seen talking to a stranger. "You're welcome to stop by anytime," Sarah offered, her voice kind but firm, as she sensed Emily might need encouragement. "I'd love to get to know you and the girls." Emily gave a small nod, but the fear in her eyes remained. "That sounds nice," she whispered, her tone unsure. Just then, a sound from inside made her jump, a loud, impatient voice calling her name. The warmth in Emily's expression vanished, replaced by a cold, practiced smile. She closed the door with a hasty, "Thanks again," leaving Sarah standing alone on the doorstep, her heart pounding with worry. As Sarah walked back to her own house, she replayed the encounter in her mind, analyzing every detail. Emily's eyes, her forced smile, and the way she held herself so tensely were all signs that something was deeply wrong. And then there was that voice, a man's voice, filled with impatience, irritation, and perhaps even anger. Sarah clenched her hands, a sense of determination forming within her. That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah struggled to sleep. She was haunted by thoughts of Emily and the twins, of what might be happening behind those closed doors. Every noise outside made her heart race, her imagination conjuring up dark scenarios. Her instincts as a teacher, and more importantly, as a human being, told her that she couldn't ignore this. There was a darkness in that house, and Sarah felt it pressing down on her, almost as if it were seeping into her own soul. The following day, she tried to go about her usual routine, but her thoughts constantly drifted back to the family next door. Then, just before dusk, she heard a sharp noise, a loud crash, followed by muffled voices, some frantic, others harsh and commanding. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she pressed her ear to the wall, straining to hear more. A child's whimpering reached her ears, followed by a man's voice barking something incomprehensible but unmistakably aggressive. Unable to stand it any longer, Sarah marched over to her phone and dialed the local police station. Her voice shook as she recounted what she had seen and heard, describing the fear in Emily's eyes and the desperation in the girls' voices. The officer on the other end listened attentively, asking clarifying questions that only seemed to heighten Sarah's anxiety. Finally, the officer assured her that they would look into it, and Sarah felt a slight sense of relief. As she hung up, Sarah knew that her actions might set something in motion, something that could end in conflict. But she also knew that she couldn't sit idly by while those girls and their mother suffered. There was a weight in her chest, a blend of fear and responsibility that drove her forward. She had done her part by reaching out to the authorities, but she would remain vigilant. She would watch and wait, ready to step in at a moment's notice if she needed to. That evening, as the sun set and darkness blanketed the neighborhood, Sarah kept her lights dimmed, her eyes fixed on the house next door. She sat by the window, watching, waiting for any sign of movement, her heart a mixture of hope and dread. The silent street, usually a source of comfort, now felt ominous, each shadow concealing potential threats. Yet despite her fear, Sarah held her ground, determined to be there for the family next door, whatever it took. She knew the path ahead would be difficult, but she was ready. This was a battle for safety, for innocence, and for justice. And as she gazed at the house under the cloak of night, she felt a strength she hadn't known in years. She was no longer just a passive observer. She was an ally, a protector, and perhaps, for Emily and her daughters, their only hope. Second ticking by with a weight that pressed down on her chest. But the street remained still, and by morning, it seemed as though the police hadn't come. Her heart sank, frustration and fear simmering beneath the surface. How could they ignore this? How could they leave those little girls and their mother in that house, trapped with a man whose presence alone seemed to suffocate them? Sarah resolved that she wouldn't let it end there. She would continue watching, continue listening, and if needed, continue pushing until someone intervened. The girls had come to her once, desperate and afraid. She couldn't bear the thought of them feeling alone and abandoned. So, she spent her days by the window, her eyes flicking to the house next door whenever she noticed the slightest movement. One afternoon, while she was in her garden, she caught sight of the twins standing by the living room window, their faces pressed against the glass. The sight tugged at her heart, their expressions a mix of longing and fear. Sarah lifted a hand in a small wave, hoping to offer them a hint of reassurance. To her relief, one of the girls returned the wave, a faint smile playing on her lips before she quickly ducked out of view. The moment was fleeting, but it reminded Sarah of her mission. They needed her, even if they couldn't say it out loud. That evening, however, things took a dark turn. Just as she was preparing for bed, a series of loud crashes echoed from the house next door, followed by raised voices. Sarah's pulse quickened as she pressed her ear to the wall, trying to decipher what was happening. She heard the man's voice, low and angry, and then the unmistakable sound of a child crying. Her heart ached, imagining the terror those girls must be feeling in that moment. This time, Sarah didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone and called the police again, her voice firm and urgent. "I called yesterday," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. "There's something happening next door, and I'm worried for the safety of the children. I think they're in real danger. Please, you have to come." The dispatcher assured her that officers would be sent immediately, and Sarah hung up, her heart pounding. She kept watch from her window, her fingers clenched tightly around the curtain. Minutes later, the wail of sirens broke the silence, and Sarah exhaled, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. She watched as 2 police cruisers pulled up, their lights flashing but sirens off. 4 officers exited their vehicles and approached the house, their postures professional but alert. The scene that unfolded was both heart-wrenching and terrifying. The front door opened, and the man stepped out, his expression a mask of irritation. Sarah could sense the hostility radiating from him even from her window. He argued with the officers, his voice rising as he gestured angrily. Sarah's eyes darted between him and the officers, hoping they wouldn't be swayed by his bluster. Then, one of the officers spoke, and the man's demeanor shifted from irritation to rage. He stepped forward, almost lunging at the officer, his hand raised as if to strike. In an instant, the officers sprang into action, restraining him as he struggled against them. Sarah watched, her hands shaking, as they placed him in handcuffs and led him toward the police car. The anger on his face was replaced with something closer to desperation as he shouted protests, his voice muffled as they closed the cruiser door. When the door clicked shut, the street fell silent again, and Sarah's gaze shifted to the house. Another officer was speaking softly to Emily, who stood in the doorway with her arms wrapped protectively around the twins. Their faces were pale, their expressions a mix of fear and relief. Sarah felt a pang of sadness as she watched them, knowing that this was only the beginning of a long road ahead for them. But she also felt a surge of hope. They were safe, at least for now. The officers remained for a while, taking statements and speaking gently to the children, who clung to their mother's side. Sarah could only imagine the stories they were telling, the fear they had endured, the moments of silence and secrets they had kept out of necessity. And now, finally, they had a chance to speak, to tell their truth without fear of retaliation. Sarah felt a small sense of satisfaction. She had done her part, but she knew that her role wasn't over. The next morning, Sarah received a visit from one of the officers who had been at the scene. Officer Rivera, a woman with a calm, steady presence, thanked Sarah for her vigilance and willingness to get involved. Not everyone would have acted, she said, her tone filled with genuine gratitude. You may have saved those children from a much darker future. Sarah's heart swelled at the officer's words, a mixture of pride and humility washing over her. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing, she replied, her voice soft but resolute. She glanced toward the house next door, the curtains still drawn, and felt a sense of purpose solidify within her. I'll be here for them, whatever they need. I'm not going anywhere. Officer Rivera nodded, a faint smile on her lips. That's exactly what they need right now. Someone stable, someone they can trust. They've been through a lot, and having you here will make all the difference. As the officer left, Sarah's resolve deepened. The girls, their mother, this family had been through an ordeal, but they had also found an ally in her. She knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy, filled with court appearances, testimonies, and the painful process of healing. But Sarah was ready. She would stand beside them through it all, offering them the strength and stability they so desperately needed. Later that day, as she prepared a simple meal, Sarah heard a soft knock at her door. When she opened it, she found Emily and the twins standing there, looking uncertain, but hopeful. Emily's eyes were filled with gratitude, her shoulders no longer slumped under the weight of fear. We just wanted to thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. I don't know where we'd be without you. Sarah's heart swelled with warmth as she welcomed them inside. You don't have to thank me, she said, her voice soft and reassuring. You're safe now, and that's all that matters. She led them to the kitchen, where the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, and they settled into a moment of peace. A moment that felt like the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. The days following the arrest were a whirlwind for Emily and her daughters. The house next door, once a prison of silence and fear, was now buzzing with activity. Officers came and went, gathering evidence and taking statements from both Emily and the children. The girls, still young and vulnerable, were hesitant to share everything, but with gentle encouragement from Officer Rivera, they began to open up. Sarah remained close by, her heart aching as she watched the toll that recounting the painful memories took on them. She could see the exhaustion in Emily's eyes and the way the twins clung to her, their small hands gripping her as though afraid to let go. Knowing that Emily needed a break, Sarah invited them over for dinner one evening. She prepared a simple, comforting meal, hoping to provide a moment of respite from the relentless questioning and procedures. As they sat around the table, a quiet warmth settled over them. The twins, Ava and Lily, seemed more at ease, their laughter bubbling up occasionally as they played with the napkins, folding them into shapes and giggling at each other's creations. Sarah noticed Emily's shoulders begin to relax, the tension melting away, if only temporarily. Thank you, Emily murmured, her voice thick with gratitude. She looked at Sarah, her eyes reflecting the depth of her appreciation. I don't know how I would have gotten through these last few days without you. Sarah reached across the table, giving Emily's hand a reassuring squeeze. You don't have to do this alone, she said softly. We're all here for you. The next day, Officer Rivera stopped by to update Sarah on the situation. She explained that the investigation had uncovered disturbing evidence of abuse and manipulation, painting a dark picture of the man who had claimed to be the girl's new dad. His background was riddled with troubling incidents that had somehow gone unchecked, allowing him to slip into this family's life undetected. He's going to face charges, Officer Rivera assured Sarah, her voice resolute. Emily and the girls will finally be free from his grasp. Hearing this, Sarah felt a mix of relief and sadness. She knew the journey was far from over. Emily and her daughters would have to navigate court proceedings and deal with the trauma they had endured. It would be a painful process, one that would demand strength and resilience. In the days that followed, Sarah noticed a change in Emily. While still haunted by memories of the past, she began to carry herself with a newfound sense of determination. Her voice grew steadier, her posture straighter, as if each day brought her closer to reclaiming her life. Sarah admired her strength, inspired by the courage Emily displayed in the face of adversity. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of it all seemed too much for Emily to bear. On those days, Sarah was there, offering a shoulder to lean on, a safe space where Emily could let her guard down. One afternoon, while sitting together in Sarah's cozy living room, Emily spoke about the toll the past few months had taken on her. "I always thought I could handle anything," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But this broke me in ways I didn't think were possible." Sarah listened, her heart heavy with empathy. "Sometimes, the strongest thing we can do is ask for help," she said gently. "You don't have to carry this alone. You have friends, and now, you have a community that cares about you and the girls." Emily nodded, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. It's hard to accept help, to feel worthy of kindness again. But seeing how much you care, it makes me believe that maybe, just maybe, there's a chance for us to start fresh. That evening, Sarah and Emily made a promise to each other. They would take it one day at a time, finding moments of peace and rebuilding a life of safety and love for Ava and Lily. Sarah knew that healing wouldn't happen overnight, but with every small step forward, they were moving closer to the light. The court dates came and went, each one more exhausting than the last. The girls had to testify, their small voices recounting the fear they had felt, the things they'd been too frightened to share before. It was heartbreaking to watch them relive those moments, but they showed incredible resilience, each word a step toward their freedom. Emily stood beside them, her presence a constant source of strength and reassurance. Through it all, Sarah was a steady presence in their lives, always there when they needed her most. She became like family, attending every court hearing, every counseling session, and every gathering at their home, reminding them that they were no longer alone. Her quiet strength bolstered Emily, who found herself relying on Sarah's support more than she'd ever anticipated. As the trial drew to a close, the verdict brought a mix of emotions. Relief flooded through Emily as she learned that her abuser would face a long sentence, but the road to recovery stretched endlessly before her. Despite the relief, Emily was left grappling with feelings of guilt, doubt, and pain. The scars were deep, and the journey to healing was daunting. But Sarah was there, reminding her that she had already taken the hardest steps. She had found the courage to leave and to protect her daughters. One evening, after a particularly difficult day in court, Sarah found Ava and Lily sitting on her porch, their faces downcast. She invited them in, preparing hot chocolate and offering them comforting smiles. They spoke in hushed tones about their fears, their dreams, and the little things that brought them joy in the midst of it all. Sarah listened patiently, her heart aching for the innocence they'd lost. In that moment, she realized that while she couldn't erase their past, she could help them build a brighter future. As the night wore on, the girls finally began to relax, their small, tired smiles bringing a warmth to Sarah's heart. She promised them that things would get better, that they would find happiness again. And in return, they hugged her tightly, their trust a precious gift that Sarah held close. Months passed, and the scars that had once been raw and painful began to heal. Emily and her daughters slowly settled into a new life filled with love, laughter, and the steady presence of Sarah by their side. The house that had once been a source of fear and pain was now a safe haven, a place where they could find peace. Sarah's home, too, had transformed. The sounds of children's laughter and the warmth of shared meals had breathed new life into her once quiet world. Ava and Lily flourished in this newfound freedom. They began attending a nearby school, making friends and discovering the joy of simply being children again. Emily found work and began to rebuild her independence, her confidence growing with each passing day. The change was gradual, but unmistakable. Their lives, once marred by darkness, were now filled with light, and the future held promise that had once seemed unimaginable. One afternoon, As they gathered in Sarah's garden for tea and homemade pastries, Ava looked up at Sarah with a curious smile. "Are you our guardian angel?" she asked innocently, her wide eyes filled with gratitude. Sarah chuckled softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Oh, sweetheart," she replied, reaching out to ruffle her hair. "I think we were all a little bit of each other's angels." Emily smiled, her hand resting gently on Sarah's. "You were more than just a neighbor, Sarah," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You were our friend, our family. You gave us hope when we had none." Sarah squeezed her hand, feeling the depth of the connection they had forged. "We saved each other," she said simply, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Their bond had grown into something beautiful, something that transcended mere friendship. They were family now, united not by blood, but by shared resilience, kindness, and the strength to overcome life's darkest moments. Together, they had built a new foundation, one rooted in love and mutual support. As the sun set, casting a warm golden glow over the garden, Sarah felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her heart was full, knowing that she had made a difference. She had given these girls a chance at a brighter future, and in return, they had given her a renewed purpose, a reason to keep going, and a family to cherish. This story is a reminder of the power of compassion and the impact of a single person willing to step up and make a difference. Sarah's actions saved a family from a life of fear and helped them rebuild with love and hope. In a world that can sometimes feel indifferent, let us remember that we each have the power to be someone's light in the darkness. If you believe in the importance of standing up for others and creating a world where kindness and courage thrive, consider joining us here on Inspiring Hearts. By subscribing, you'll become part of a community that celebrates empathy, resilience, and hope. We're dedicated to sharing stories that uplift, educate, and inspire. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our future stories. Together, let's spread love, one story at a time. Thank you for watching, and remember, your actions, no matter how small, can change someone's world.